this, but I want to just go through these quickly, and then we'll look at some other maps. The fence, the barrier, the wall. This is the fence. This is in the West Bank. And you can see the fence here. And then the trenches. And then there are electrical sensors. So Israeli forces can know when anyone is crossing over. And you see the separation of the land. This is Palestinian land. Makes it impossible for them to farm the land and to move about. Here's the wall. Most of these pictures are done by Israeli Jews of conscience. These are the uprooting of olive trees in the West Bank. Thousands of them uprooted. These are the towers that are along the wall, which allows Israel to look inside the wall and to monitor Palestinian life. Fences to keep Jewish-only roads in the West Bank free of debris or rocks from Palestinians. Kikilia is a city that is completely walled in. You can see the tower, observing what's going on inside. So we have to ask this question. Remember, it's in the West Bank. We're going to come to some maps in just a moment. Is it a security wall for Israel? If Israel in the 67 borders wants to build a wall, up to them. I'm not in favor of it, but go ahead. It's not in the 67 borders. It's in the West Bank. Is it an apartheid wall or a ghetto wall? Call it what you want. Now, here are the maps. This is the agreed upon two-state solution, international. Here you have Israel. Here you have Palestine with East Jerusalem, Gaza, and a connector to the West Bank. That's the internationally agreed upon two-state solution. We can argue whether it's fair for Palestine. Anyway, that's the agreed upon international solution. All of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, with a connector, that's Palestine. Here's some maps of Israel in the West Bank. These are going to be repetitive. We'll go through them quickly. But the repetitive nature is what's significant. This is Area A, the dark brown, which after Oslo, this is 1995, would go directly to Palestinian control. And here's Area B, gray. That would be under Israeli and Palestinian control, but would go back to Palestinians. So that Palestine would be dark and light. And this is Israel in the West Bank, which would remain with Israel. Now here's Israel over here, the 67 borders, right? And here's Israel. These purple triangles are settlements, Jewish settlements, which would ultimately expand, so you basically have a purple and brown map in the West Bank. So this 1995 map, Israel's not leaving the West Bank. Here's a 1997 map. Palestine, Israel. These are Jewish settlements, which will grow. 2000. Here's Palestine. Here's Israel. Notice that Israel is within and in between Palestine in the West Bank on all sides. This is Barak's generous offer. Here's the 80% Palestinian control, but look where Israel is in the West Bank. Here's Taba, which is supposedly the most generous offer ever to Palestinians. Here's Palestine. Here's Israel. Again, the triangles are Israeli settlements. Notice that Israel is always on this side as well. Sharon, when he was feeling generous toward Palestinians. It's the same map. This is what Barack Obama visited. This is where he visited. This is interesting. This is in the Wall Street Journal last year. You know, Palestinians have complained correctly, rightly, Jewish dissenters have complained correctly, that the mainstream press hasn't carried this. Yeah, for 2 decades they have. Yes, they hadn't. That's true. These maps have been in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. These are settlements in the West Bank, Israeli settlements. Again, if we saw this map, we take out Jews or Palestinians and just use X's and O's. Everyone would agree on what these maps mean. Everybody in this room. But when we put Jews and Palestinians, it changes for some reason. These maps are obvious. Israel is never leaving the West Bank. Now, I'm not even talking about Gaza. I'm not even talking about East Jerusalem. They're never leaving that either. They're not leaving. That's why the discussion has moved toward one state. Because nobody, including Palestinian analysts, believes that Israel is leaving. Now, history is open. Okay. History is open. I'm just telling you. My view is Israel is never leaving the West Bank. What Barack Obama said when he was there was you can have autonomy within Israeli domination. That's what he said to Palestinians, really. Maps of Jewish identity and truth-telling. Yes, we as Jews come after the Holocaust, yes, but we come after Israel as well. What do I mean by that? After what Israel has done and is doing to the Palestinian people. Our identity as Jews is after the Holocaust and after Israel. We are no longer innocent. We are culpable in the use of our power against another people. So, we have the Holocaust, but here, these are our towns and villages in Palestine that were destroyed when Palestinians were forced out. So, what is Israel today within the 67 borders is also part of Palestine. That is part of our identity, which we don't talk about. That those hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and that life there was expelled. Now, there were 150,000 Palestinians left in what became Israel. They're now over 1 million. They're citizens, but they're second or third class citizens. That's a part of our map. And then the West Bank. This is a rendering of what the wall will look like when it's completed and what Palestinians will be within in the West Bank. And of course, the United States. You know, I asked this as I was celebrating or commemorating the 25th anniversary of Toward a Jewish Theology of Liberation, which unfortunately, you know, any author in the internet age wants his or her words to be relevant 2 days after they're written. But 25 years later, I'm not so glad. Because actually the message, I think, is even more important today. That's not a good sign from my perspective. And I'm not rewarded for it either, so both. We have become completely encased in the United States as Jews. Not only Israel. I mean, when you have votes in the United Nations, you have the United States, Micronesia, El Salvador, and you could name a few others that vote with us. How did it come to that? Now, the whole world could be wrong. It's possible. Totally, yeah, it could be wrong. The whole world could be wrong. But I think we need to listen to the lack of support. The other thing is, we place, as Jews, all our eggs in the U.S. basket. It's very dangerous. And it's also constricted our view of the world. You know, Jews were all over the world. We lost a lot of that in the Holocaust. And then Jews going to Israel. So our diaspora has shrunk. We have a very narrow view of the world. Okay, it's a powerful view. What happens when that power goes? What happens to us then? The future of Jewish life? I believe from the beginning that Jews have been on both sides of the empire divide. We're the great prophets and the great empire builders. The empire builders believe that the prophetic can never sustain a people, even though I believe the prophetic is the indigenous of the people Israel. The indigenous. We have to choose in every generation. Which side, as Jews, are we going to be on? The prophetic or empire? Negotiating the prophetic. Okay, maybe you can't live just with the prophetic. So, secure? Yes, Jews need to be secure. But can't we be secure and just? Isn't that our mandate? And our Jewish colonial identity. This is never talked about. I talked about the shrinking of our world, putting all our eggs in the U.S. basket. The way we look at Palestinians and Arabs, racist. We have a colonial identity. So funny. Hannah Arendt believed that in the Jewish homeland, what was great about it from the international perspective is a community, Jews, without a colonial history from the West, would meet a colonized people. We could then construct a new kind of relationship. But hey, we now have a completely colonial identity as Jews, which we look at the world through that colonial gaze. Do we recognize it as such? No way. Because we believe, like Jews cannot be ethnic cleansers, how can we be? How can we have a colonial identity? They do. No, we do. Okay, we're coming to the end. The future of Israel-Palestine, the reality, Israel controls from Tel Aviv to the Jordan River. There is one state which Jews control with millions of Palestinians in between. What's going to happen? I don't know. Can't go on that way forever. There is one state now. And if you look at the maps, within Israel, 1 million Palestinians, 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank. We've looked at those maps. Over 1 million Palestinians in Gaza. Now, I'm not talking about the refugees in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan. We could talk about that too. All of those populations, those three within what Israel controls, and also Egypt now from Gaza, Palestinians are remnant populations surrounded by Israeli power. Again, if we looked at the map and didn't say Jewish and Palestinian, everyone would say that's what it is. It's an obvious map. It can't be sustained. And it's unjust. Possibilities I talked about, but forget it, I'm being nostalgic. The broken middle of Jerusalem. Here was my vision. An Israeli prime minister would go to Jerusalem, gather Palestinian leadership, and say, what we as Jews have done to you, the Palestinian people, is wrong. What we as Jews are doing to you, the Palestinian people, is wrong. We are going to begin again. with justice and equality. By the way, Prime Minister doesn't have to say there was no justification for a Jewish state, nothing in Jewish. No, I'm not even talking about that. What we have done to you is wrong. We have to start again. How would we start again? We would share Jerusalem in complete equality. That means, very simple, from garbage collection to the police force, the city council, everything would be shared, Jews and Palestinians. By the way, I have this vision. Let's take several areas in Israel-Palestine and make them completely integrated. Then let Jews who want to live alone and Palestinians who want to live alone, let them do that over the next 25 years. Let's see which areas are more attractive to people and where they want to live. The integrated or the non-integrated areas. Let's see it. Let's try. It's what I call the broken middle of Jerusalem. Jerusalem being the middle for Jews and Palestinians, both broken peoples. My idea of revolutionary forgiveness. Take the memories of suffering of both peoples. Begin a new walk together. Let the memories of justice and equality keep building. Let the memories of injustice and equality remain. But as you begin to build these new memories, those memories take over. Until an offense against one is an offense against both. An offense against Jews is an offense against Palestinians. An offense against Palestinians is an offense against Jews. That's when you've achieved what I call revolutionary forgiveness, with justice at the center. But forget it. It's not happening. So, Palestinian autonomy, we've gone through this for years. That's what Obama was saying. That means in autonomy, you can run your own communities within the larger framework of Israeli power. Civil rights movement in this area that's controlled by Israel with millions of Palestinians who can't live that way? That might be what happens. Like South Africa. Or a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. It's the most likely thing to happen. And when I say that, people say, there have been so many catastrophes in the Middle East. That's right. But there hasn't been the one of unimaginable proportions, which is a miracle. I'm talking about a rocket from Lebanon or Gaza going into Tel Aviv, for instance. Let's say 3,000 Jews are killed. What would happen then? You know, we're right on the precipice of the unimaginable, which has not happened. Emmanuel Levinas wrote about Judaism. Judaism has always wished to be a simultaneous engagement and disengagement. The most deeply engaged person, one who can never be silent, the prophet, is also the most separate being, the least capable of becoming an institution. But this essential content, which history cannot touch, cannot be learned like a catechism or summarized like a credo. It is acquired through a way of living that is a ritual and a heartfelt generosity. It is an asceticism, like the training of a fighter. This is his vision of Jewishness, Emmanuel Levinas. Well, I have to throw this in. From Milarepa, a Tibetan yogi. It is the tradition of fortunate seekers never to be content with partial practice. Now it's an interesting, partial, going all the way, not partial. Tradition of fortunate seekers. If you go all the way, you have to ask if you're fortunate to. It's like a book I wrote, Practicing Exile. The first was exile section, traveling the diaspora, no problem. The third section was gratitude. Could you be grateful as a Jew for being in exile? That was the most difficult to write. Milarepa is saying, fortunate. It is the tradition of fortunate seekers never to be content with partial practice. Well, Emil Fackenheim, one of the Holocaust theologians, there are 613 commandments in Orthodox Jewish life. And he said, after the Holocaust, we don't know about God, but Jews as a people have declared a 614. Basically, after the 67, during the 67 war, Arab-Israeli war, where Jews fought against the Arab countries, that Hitler would no longer win. He thought it was a battle for survival. He said, the 614th commandment. I figured if he can do it, I'm doing one too. So my 615th commandment is, thou shalt not demean the Palestinian people. Yes, Jews need power. How about an interdependent empowerment with the Palestinian people? Well, finally, the Passover Regatta, this was 2012, Jewish Voice for Peace. Notice the olive tree. When they took the traditional plagues, blood, frogs, lice, wild beasts, and all, and rewrote it to the 10 plagues of occupation. Poverty, restrictions on movement, water shortage, destruction of olive trees, home demolitions, settlements, political prisoners, profiteering from occupation, denial of right of return, erasing history. So these are rabbis. It's so funny, I've had a fight with rabbis my whole life, even when I was in Hebrew school. That's another story. But the rabbinate in general has been a scandal in this part of Jewish history. The rabbis, by the way, don't always disagree with me. They're just usually afraid to say it in public. So they want me to say it. Not all rabbis. A lot of rabbis don't want me to say it. I had a rabbi once who said that I was coming to town, he'd like to meet with me. I said, oh, great. Where's your synagogue? I'll come right over. He said, no, I can't meet with you in the synagogue. I said, oh, well, maybe I figured I'd get a free meal. Let's go out to eat. No, I can't be seen with you in a restaurant. I said, well, I'm at this hotel. How about the lobby? Can't be seen. Where do you want to meet with me? My room, my hotel room. I said, I don't meet rabbis in hotel rooms. So there's a rabbinical council now. So here's the positive side, because I've been accused of not being hopeful. Okay, so I want to just hit it that right away. Jews of conscience are on the move. It's a growing segment of Jewish life, including rabbis. There are more and more Jews who are finding their voice. Is it too late? Yeah. Yes. But in our lives, personal and communal, where we are, we begin. We're usually too late on many, many issues. If you're old enough, you know what I mean. Unless you're perfect. Okay. Okay, all right. Fair enough. My new golden rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If people have to leave, you're welcome to go. Yeah, we're also willing to take some questions. So if anybody has any questions for Dr. Ellis, you're welcome.
Aaron, would you like to announce the rest of Palestine events?
Yeah, sure. Before we get into the questions, we've got a couple more events coming up. Tomorrow at 7 o'clock in the Goldstein Library, we've got a Skype interview.
It's at 5 o'clock.
It's at 5 o'clock tomorrow. We've got an interview with an activist who was seriously, nearly critically injured by a tear gas canister. He's going to speak about some of his experiences. And then on Friday, we have Josh Rubner, who's a political analyst, and he'll be talking about the relationship of the United States to Israel and what that means for U.S. politics and things like that. Hope you come out. But yeah, questions? Okay, one.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellis. That was highly informative. My comment to this is recently I read a memoir by Queen Noor, Canadian Queen Noor, on her life as a fighting over power. And learning about this issue make the distinction between, I guess, a misleading definition of Zionism as simply a homeland Zionism rather than the political thought, philosophical thought started by a Jewish journalist back in Hungary, Austria, back in the late 19th century, simply suggesting that there should be a nation state for the Jews, not a homeland, which is Jerusalem. And I believe there was talks about the settlement of the Jewish state in Uganda, which somehow got thrown out. And in the discourse of this, so much can be talked about after World War II, the settlement of the Jewish state, but I believe the most important thing to me was the awful declaration back in 1926, or actually a letter of by the recognition of the British colonial power of a Jewish state inside Palestine. And I think that was the beginning of all the problems that we have today. First of all, it's a very small city-state. It's barely sufficient enough to, support the existence of the existing people there. And now you have all the Jews around the world settling there. Obviously, we have not just a population problem, we have planning environmental problems.
What is the question now?
I wonder the question of, not quite a question, but what I was wondering was people like you, talking about this solution, possible solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What do you think of the role of the outsiders, the British, and today mostly the Americans, to determine the history of the Arab people, the Jewish people, and to bring it back home? There's theory saying that because of the mistreatment of the support, overwhelming support of Israel, that they were anchored in the Arab world on how America handled the situation that created into extreme Islamists.
Well,
if we get into that.
Yeah, this is Zionism is extremely complicated. The outside powers in this are extremely complicated. I'm trying to focus on Jewish responsibility. Now, focusing on Jewish responsibility does not make any part of the world, including the Jewish community, perfect. So I'm trying to limit it, but we could go on in many different directions, including Balfour, the British, the Ottomans, forever. I'm concentrating on Jewish responsibility. What is our responsibility as Jews? Now, my own sense is, within this history, which is very complicated, and creates tremendous amount of anger and violence, and hope sometimes, that the best thing to do, from my perspective, is to take this together and say, we have Israel and Palestine, let's have two states, and let them work it out together over time what their relationship will be. That would be my view. Because it is unbelievably complicated. And get the world to support those two states. And get Israel and Palestine and the world to invest in those two states. And to make them two real states. For me, now Palestinians can argue, and I've heard them argue, and I respect that argument, restricting us to Gaza, East Jerusalem, the West Bank is not just or fair. That is an argument that I can hear. I'm telling you my view within this history of what we should do to begin to move forward. What I'm also saying is that Israel's conquering of the West Bank and its refusal to withdraw is making that impossible. So I'm saying what I want and what I think is the best solution within the history that we have is not going to happen. Which means that Palestinians are being forced to the wall, which they can't accept. Now, if you ask me, then, well, what's going to happen? I don't know. Being honest with you, I don't know. But I do know this. For the last decade and more, I've said it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And unfortunately, I've been right. I believe it's going to get worse further. Now, does that mean there will never be justice? I'm not saying that. Does that mean there will never be a resolution that is fair? No, I'm not saying that. I would say it is extremely unlikely that in my lifetime I will see that. Now, there are various conjectures on what that lifetime ought to consist of. So, okay. I got that. Okay? Very complicated history. What you do with complicated histories, including your own, is try to negotiate a way forward. There are complaints on all sides. Okay. There's injustice and corruption everywhere. I come from a university that I realized was completely corrupt. I'm sorry. Okay. Next.
Okay, I've got Jeremy, and then I've got Gabe, and then I've got 3.
I was hoping you could speak more to the idea of the prophetic as being indigenous to Judaism. For instance,
Not Judaism, Jewish life,
to Jewish life.
the people of Israel.
And yeah, for instance, your colleague had the statement that the rabbinic has trumped that in Jewish life, has trumped the setting of the rabbinic. And is there some sense in which what he's thinking of as kind of normative rabbinic Judaism is in contrast to what you're saying, is kind of prophetic that maybe is necessarily always kind of on the margins, the Jews of conscience that represent that? Is that a necessary?
Well, now this is a long discussion, which my new book is called. Anyway,
New book.
Anyway. What is it called? The Future Prophetic. Thank you. Okay, this is my belief. Okay, so I'm just sharing. If you, and I'm not an expert on the Hebrew Bible. I'm not a scholar. But I'm going to tell you what I believe. And I've read a lot of stuff. I actually love deconstruction. And I was criticized by the great deconstructor, Shlomo Sand in Israel, before he became famous. He was yelling at me. He was responding to me. I gave a keynote, the only keynote I've ever given in Israel. And he was yelling at me that I was too easy on the Israelis. And I smiled throughout. He cornered me in the back, and he was even more upset. Why are you smiling when I'm criticizing you? And I said, I love being criticized from the left. I was enjoying it. But he can't explain himself. His deconstruction is part of the Jewish prophetic. So I talk about the persistence of the prophetic. My understanding is that the indigenous of the people of Israel is not the land, although that's part of the original narrative, no question. The promise of the land, no question. I'm not denying that at all. But the criticism of the prophets trumps that. If you've noticed in Jewish history, at least as recalled in the Bible, right? You reconstruct empire in the land, you're finished. Don't come to me, God. That's basically. Who tells them? The prophets.
From the margins.
No. It seems like it. I seem to be on the margin. That is true. Okay. No. The margin is the center. I didn't say it wins. The margin is the center. By the way, Dorothy Day Feltus, you probably never heard of her. She was a Catholic saint, really, a prophet, who refused burial in the cathedral. She worked among the poor and wanted to be buried in the Jesuit church among the poor. He had the cardinal outside in her funeral service greeting people. He wasn't even allowed inside. Was she marginal? Well, from the cathedral's perspective, she refused to go to the center of the cathedral because she thought the center was the poor. I'm saying the prophetic is the central issue, and that rabbinic Judaism, which has much, very beautiful, was a mistake. That's my opinion. I know, I'm not getting hired here, it's all right. Now, that's not to say, by the way, I'd say this about Christianity. The Gregorian chant is beautiful, but what was happening outside those walls? The Vatican is beautiful, but the Pope stayed in the Vatican during the Holocaust. The Vatican seems to be the center, right? But no, that's the margins. So I'm showing you my bias. The prophetic is not marginal. It's the center of Jewish life. That's why it has to be beaten down all the time. Why does it have to be beaten down if it's not important? And why would somebody saying what I'm saying, I have no power at all? Why is it so important to beat someone like me down since I have no power? You know why? The prophetic continues to challenge the narrative. And Jews who don't want that prophetic are haunted by it. That's what makes us different. We're haunted by the prophetic. Why? Because we know it's the center. I'm just sharing with you my bias.
Okay.
So recently, Norman Finkelstein levied some really heavy criticism against the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, saying that it would never catch on and never achieve anything because it's agnostic as to the existence of Israel as a state. What's your position on the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement?
Norman is losing his cult. It's very important. Norman believes, and they always say Norman, so I'm just going to use it, Norman. And, he's done important work, but he's a cult figure. And the debate has moved beyond him. He believes that international law will ultimately bring about two states. He's wrong. I didn't say it's not a good idea to say it's wrong. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I have an article in a new book on it. Usually they don't ask me to write for these things, but first of all, boycott, divestment, and sanctions is very complicated. So let's just get it out there because somebody's going to ask me. Is there anti-Semitism in the world? Yes. Is there anti-Semitism in that movement? I've experienced it. Yes, there is. Is it an anti-Semitic movement? No, it's not. Do I support it? Yes, I do. Do I think it's primarily symbolic? Yes. Do I think it's prophetic? Yes. Am I a secular one-stater? No. Do I believe in Jewish particularity? Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, all right, I'm having a little fun, but I'm being serious, okay? Boycott, divestment, and sanctions is a symbolic and real movement that's very important to address the question of Israel-Palestine because Israel has not withdrawn from the 67 borders, to the 67 borders. So I support it. Is it complicated? Yes. Everything that surrounds Jews in the West and beyond is complicated because of this whole history, right? But that's the way it is. Should Jews be silent because it's complicated? No. Is Norman Finkelstein right? No, he's not. Do I know the answer? No, I don't. So, what we need to do also, all of us who have been around forever, Jewish descent, it's like a battlefield. There are bodies all over the place. And some of us have survived. And you fight to survive for your voice that you hear of the sound. But we also have to realize that we can get too invested in our own voice. That's why when Josh Rubner comes, whom I sponsored many years ago, he's a younger, we need younger Jewish voices, and of course other voices too, right? Because us veterans are done. We still have to do something, but basically we're done. And we failed. Now, will your generation fail? Maybe, maybe not. That's the challenge. Has a Jewish establishment or Jewish institutions made it easier for Jews to dissent? No. They've made it more difficult. Is that a service to our people? No, it's not. It's a disservice. When others are silent, who are not Jewish, are you friends of the Jewish people? No, you're not. If you're anti-Semitic, wrong. You're being idiotic about your own histories. So we all have to lay down some of our views in order to come to a more measured response so Jews in Israel and Palestinians in Palestine can live and flourish. If we could get there, then we could work on more justice and more equality. But we're farther away from that than when I wrote Toward a Jewish Theology of Liberation. And I gave a talk at Harvard. Yes, I was even invited to Harvard. What was the difference, 1987 and today? On every issue, Jews are worse off internationally, ethically, politically, our future. In every way, we're worse off. Palestinians, in every material way, they're worse off. So we've got to reverse all of that. BDS is one way of approaching that, and I think an important way.
Go here and then here.
Thank you. I have two questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do one first. And
Just
then
keep them short if you could. Short
the first
question.
one, in regards to how you describe the situation as being the moment one. One of the arguments people make about how countries lose their colonies is simply that it's not worth it to upkeep them anymore. And one of the arguments that I've read about is that humanitarian aid received, that Palestine receives, especially in the West Bank, by the United States, by European powers, especially by Arab countries, are essentially subsidizing the West Bank and making occupation for Israel free, as opposed to letting it become too expensive.
question?
Yeah, what do you think about that? Do you support extended humanitarian aid?
No, I just love it. Of course, I called it the UNRWAization of Palestine. The international dependence makes it worse, of course. And the international support is a way of keeping the lid on. Now, I had a South African student many years ago, before apartheid was over, who said in a class, very soft-spoken gentleman, said that he wanted all missionaries, we were in a Catholic institution, and all NGOs to leave South Africa. And one of the students I had was a nurse. He said, but if I'm not there, your people will die. Let them die, he said, because we can't be free while you're there. Now, I'm just telling you what he said. There are some on the West Bank who want the Palestinian Authority to collapse. You think, oh my God, what would happen? Some say it couldn't be worse. So dependence on international aid means permanent. Everyone's then invested in that. Now, I'm not going to argue that others should die. I'm just telling you we're talking about an argument. So, yes, it's and there's a whole discussion about the NGOs who are doing all this good work. They're embedded in the occupation. Right? And all of Israel is embedded in it. If you look at corporate profits, everybody in Israel, okay, not everybody, but right, in any occupation like that, everybody has a buck to make. What one writer called it, a civilian occupation. So Israel is invested in occupation, but any occupying power for that length of time invests in it. So you've got to make it unprofitable. BDS is an example of an attempt to make it unprofitable.
You mentioned the role of the United States and some of your goals for Israelis and Palestinians to work together in the future. My question is, what can Palestinians do working with Jews in America and the remaining Jewish diaspora? And which groups in particular would you say Palestinians have a peace partner in? I saw you had one image with the Jewish Voice for Peace tag in it. So what is your...
Yeah, I've written about this and thought about it, that the Jewish and Palestinian diasporas, also within Israel and Palestine, or you could say Jews and Palestinians of conscience, however you want to describe it, that is a great fertile ground for the future. And we have to recognize, first of all, Jews have to recognize there is a Palestinian diaspora. It may be obvious to Palestinians, but Jews have to say yes. And then Jews of conscience have to agree, and there's more and more work in that area. In fact, in 1988, when the Palestinian uprising, first uprising, there was a lot of work across that. It was a very hopeful time, very tragic time, but hopeful. That has decreased in many ways in Israel-Palestine, but increased in the Jewish and Palestinian diasporas. How that can be translated politically back to Israel-Palestine, that has not happened at all. None. Been a complete failure. Does it always have to be? No. What would it take for it not to be? I don't know. on the one hand, during that first uprising, there was a sense that, there was a real sense that it could happen. That sense is over. We're in a very different situation, and I don't think that the discourse reflects the situation. I mean, in 1987, 88, 89, Palestine was up, suffering, and I was there often, I saw it. And even Israelis, you have these stories of these Israeli commanders who were arresting Palestinians saying, I respect you. Oh yes, and I record this in no one reads my books, but they're there. I always say I'm the best unread author in the world. So anyway, this is a very important history. We're way farther away from that. Although young Palestinians and young have dropped a lot of this weight. You can see that in young Jews and young Palestinians. Just know, hey, how you doing? What are we going to do together? There's some great hope there. But politically, complete failure. And when Barack Obama, and I don't know if you saw Jon Stewart, I just saw it on the internet. He had Barack Atah, I don't know if you saw it, it's really funny. Did a tremendous disservice to the Jewish people. Okay, Palestinians, obviously. Tremendous disservice to the Jewish people in that trip. Because he didn't elevate Palestinians to complete equality. Identifying with Jews, terrific. No problem. He's welcome. But here's another. Okay, we can go on forever, so I'm not going to. Those of us, many in the Jewish community, including Israel, who have been working on the narrative of the creation of the State of Israel and what's happened to Palestinians, have won. I even get, sometimes publishers send you books to ask what you think about it. These introductions to Judaism now that I get often have sections of Israel-Palestine that reflect the narrative I'm giving. These are introductions to Judaism. On the narrative section of what happened to Palestinians, we've won. Everyone in the world who isn't trying to deflect knows that Palestinians were driven out. Politically, we've lost everything. Now you figure, at some point the narrative is going to catch up. And then Barack Obama goes to Israel and recites a narrative that's more or less like the Pilgrims came to the Americas and had a Thanksgiving turkey. What's going on in his mind? Now, I don't expect him to write a critical history of the United States when he's giving a presidential address. Now, he does have some words about occupation and expel. Did you notice that? There's one thing about expel. Now, he doesn't refer back to the origins. He's referring to something, a possible future. He doesn't go into it. When he says Jewish homeland, Palestinians, Palestinian home. Now, every word is vetted in these things. I mean, I'm not trying to just be picky. So, narrative, we won. Congratulations. Politically, Palestinians are dead on. Permanently, for my lifetime. How that will be translated. But the hopeful sign, Jews and Palestinians outside gather now in a way that was unknown.
Can you say something more about what a Jewish theology of liberation will look like, since there's a word in the title, beyond what you said already about a shared history of oppression by Latin Americans under the Conquista, might add African Americans with James Cone, and Judaism and Christianity?
Well, the key for all Jewish life is Israel-Palestine. So I do not agree with the movement in universities, the textual reasoning group that doesn't want to discuss the Holocaust of Israel. I believe that Jews are invested and are responsible for Israel's Holocaust of Israel. So, in terms of liberation, we have to work through our history. The key that unlocks it is justice for Palestine. If we could get to that key, our colonial identity would begin to, we've realized that, we'd have to work on that. And we would open ourselves to other peoples on the margins recognizing that historically we've been marginal, and if we follow that path, we might be marginal again in some ways, and that our power has not liberated. So I know that sounds broad, but to me it's very concrete. What would it look like? What would a shared Jerusalem? Let's think about it. What would it look like for Jewish life? I know I'm concentrating on Jewish. If an Israeli prime minister just said, what we as Jews have done for years, Palestinian people, is wrong. When I go around the world, and I'm not always in such great circumstances, I go to Malaysia and talk to Muslims. I go to local mosques in Pakistan. I've been places you couldn't imagine. When I share honestly my views, all the stuff, or much of the stuff that's been built up across the world, what would it mean for Jews in the world, we're Jews, and for others who are interacting with us, for an Israeli prime minister to say, okay, we were wrong. What we did to you, we're sorry. I think it would re-energize the prophetic in Jewish life. The contributions Jews have made and can make to the world on all levels. What if the rabbi said, you know what? We, in general, have been a scandal in this part of Jewish history. We wanted to do it. What if the rabbi said that? You really want to solve it. What if the rabbi said, and Jewish academics said, the way we've used the Holocaust is wrong. The way we've censored discussion in the universities is wrong. The way we've tried to put Jewish dissidents out of Jewish studies is wrong. We want to begin again. What if Jewish students heard that message from the people they respect as authorities? What if others, including Palestinians, heard that message from Jews? I have many stories. I'll just give you one on this. I was in Jerusalem in 1988-89, talking with a friend who was saying that the rabbi over there was saying I would never be important in Jewish history. And as he was telling me how unimportant I was, a Palestinian, I saw a Palestinian, was carrying a copy toward Jewish theology and liberation, and he was coming toward me. And he said, I said, oh, he said, would you sign my book? I said, well, yes, but why? Why? He was from the West Bank. And he said, because this shows to me a different kind of Jewishness than I have experienced. I said, but I have no power. I want this in my home. Now, politically it means nothing. I'm right, I have no power. What are these meetings? We talk about the Jewish and Palestinian diaspora that has no power and has failed. This Palestinian who wanted my book in his home. What does that mean? Here's Martin Buber on this. Buber believed that the prophetic always failed. Right? Love Martin Buber. I know, right. Prophetic always failed. It was addressing a stream of history that was not obvious, the history from below, right? The prophetic failures of all communities were part of a different stream of history that would one day bring redemption. Okay, as Rubenstein would say, Buber was an idealist. Yeah, okay, right, no, a utopian. Dangerous. But what if we believe the other thing? That the history that we see is the final answer. Well, then we're in tragedy on many levels. So, a Jewish theology of liberation said, from 1987, the key is justice for Palestinians. People say, well, there are many other issues, like feminist liturgies? Yes, there are. It's meaningless without that justice. We recently had Jewish women at the wall. Right? Oh yeah, I support it. Yeah, okay. Everyone should pray wherever they want. But did they communicate that the wall had been cleansed of the Moroccan quarter when Israel took Jerusalem in 1967? That where they were praying had been cleansed. So what does that liturgy mean there? That women can pray there. Do I believe in women's equality? Yeah, yes. We can never be liberated as long as we oppress. We can have billions of dollars. We can have the Goldstein Center here. Is it Goldstein? No, what is it? The library.
Goldstein.
Goldstein Library? No. Is he a Protestant?
The head of the library science.
Okay, all right. Okay, I forget my. Anyway, you see what I'm saying? So that's my vision. Now, you might say I'm obsessed about this thing. That's all right. You tell me an issue, and I don't consider it an issue. I consider it the center. If the covenant, right, now here's, my whole life has basically been a response to Rubinstein, I admit it. If the covenant, if the heart of the covenant is violence and atrocity, how can we be healed of the Holocaust? You know, 1987 today, are Jews any closer to healing of the trauma of the Holocaust? Can we heal the trauma of the Holocaust by oppressing another people? Has that healed us? Okay, so I say, okay, all right, that hasn't done it. So let's try another way. How about Palestinians and Jews being free in their own homeland? Would that heal us? Well, we're afraid of that too. There's a fear because the Jewish establishment, and maybe many Jews inside think, hey, if we get rid of the Holocaust and Israel as center in that way, maybe there won't be any center for being Jewish anymore. Maybe the whole thing will collapse. Because Holocaust in Israel has become central to Jewish identity. Now, that whenever something's central, you have a fear of letting it go, personal or communal, right? Because then you think, well, if I'm not that, what am I? So we actually don't know. And this is where I criticize Judith Butler. Judith Butler has a sense that Israel is completely unimportant. You have a Jewishness that's just sort of free-floating with others. I think she's brilliant. She uses the same figures that I wrote about in 1990. Of course, much more brilliant than she writes. That's true. But she doesn't know what it's like to live without Israel, nor do I. Very few Jews know how to live without that. And that isn't going away. The question is, what are we going to do with it? That's the central question. Not doing away with Israel. Not parting ways with Israel. What are we going to do with Israel as Jews? Because it isn't just Israelis. It's Jews in the United States and all over the world. But we're afraid now. What would we be if that wasn't our center in a certain way? I think this fear is very strong about our future. A Jewish theology of liberation says, risk it. This is killing us. Oppressing another people is not our future. If it is, by the way, then admit it. It's very interesting. If that's our future and we need it, say it. I want the Prime Minister of Israel to say, we are oppressing the Palestinian people and we don't give a damn and we're going to do it as long as we want. Okay, at least that would be honest. By the way, Rubinstein would say it. Rubinstein said that Palestinians have every right to fight Israel and we have every right to beat them. I love Rubinstein. He was honest. I mean, I disagree with him. But he was honest. But why don't we say this? I'm going to tell you why. Jews have never, ever, 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 as a collective, explained ourselves in any way except that we are exceptional. Now, we may not be exceptional. I'm not claiming that as a fact. I'm just telling you. Jews have never explained themselves as like everyone else. We might be. That's a different issue. We might be. That's a different issue, but we've never explained. So the Jewish establishment says, they're the culprits. We're not doing anything wrong. They're the ones. They can't say, you know what, tough. I would like Barack Obama to say, you know what, tough. Israel's got it now, and I want him to have it. Okay, all right. At least we can have the discussion. Jews aren't going to do that. Because we can't justify ourselves by saying it. So, since we can't actually say what we're doing, it might be a hint that we shouldn't do it. That's the prophetic. That's haunted by the prophetic.
Time for one more question. Dr. Levinson.
As somebody who shares your obsession, of course, the interesting thing is what you share, a lot of people in the Jewish community is the focus on Israel, as you just said.
Yeah.
And I think there are people who don't want to see Israel-Palestine as an issue or want to ignore it, and this is what you thought 25 years ago. I think the thing that strikes me, and especially for this crowd, the old home week kind of experience here, is that in the mid-'80s at FSU, there were groups of Jews and Arabs and others together working on both dialogue issues, political issues, a variety of issues, and really at a time when it wasn't done anymore. This was before the First Intifada. And what was interesting about that is as we worked together, and my wife and I were actually, that's how I met my wife, we were working together on this with people from the Arab community, the Arab Student Association at that time. We had a lot of great programs. But what we ended up doing at that point was working out what we could agree on and having mini peace negotiations. Very deep. And so we would work on these programs and, okay, what is exactly your position on this? We would write these things and then we would send it off and we would vet it and we'd get angry at each other and then we'd come back. And this was in the mid-'80s. And of course, what we came up with, the only thing that enabled us to be together was, and to work together and to understand each other, was this two-state solution. At the time, it was not the mainline position, either not Israelis or not Palestinians. It was just the beginning of something, but it enabled us to work together. And now we've moved, and I agree with all the horrors that you've described in the trajectory, one way of looking at the trajectory, but there's another way. And that is, who is the representative right now within Israel of really arguing for a two-state solution, by the way, that is not the maps that you presented, but a map that is virtually the entire West Bank, with relatively small land swaps, and I know we could talk about that. It is Olmert and Livni, people who were essentially the center of the right-wing Likud party. Now you think about that as movement. That is major movement. Even as terrible as the situation is on the ground, as horrible as it's gotten, there's another narrative. That's all I'm saying. It begins in the 80s as Jews and Arabs have worked together, and what people, at that point, what we have as a vision is now widely accepted throughout the world. And that's kind of an interesting
right. But David, here's...
Now we can argue about whether it's likely to work out.
Yeah, forgetting about that for a second. Even that vision, and you know, this recent election is not positive. And the centrist candidate, when you hear what he says about Palestinians, it's, you know, some of this stuff, by the way, is just disgusting, right? Now, I was writing a blog for 6 months. Yeah. I was writing a blog for 6 months on Mon Device, and I was very faithful every day, 180, then I stopped. But one of the things that surfaced was Morsi's comments in 2010, president of Egypt, on Jews. I don't know if you saw this. I mean, disgusting comments about Jews, about being apes and pigs. And you know political pandering, but you know there's a limit, right? But the discussion in Israel over time, in many ways, has gotten worse, sometimes better. Well, about Arabs and Palestinians. And regardless of that, the settlements, which are really cities, we call them settlements, have expanded since the 80s to such an extent that nobody believes, and no plan that's being surfaced has anything to do with those big cities. I'm not talking about the outliers. So the amount of land that they're discussing for a Palestinian state in the heart of the West Bank, I'm not talking about swaps with the negative, David. Okay, anyway, we're not going to get into an argument. You know, well, okay, let's disagree. I need some friends. I can't alienate anyone. Let's say the situation as it is way, way worse than you were when you guys were discussing it in the 80s, than when I wrote my book. Way, way worse. And you know what? The abyss that we as Jews have fallen into is way worse. If you just take the invasions, incursions, whatever you want to talk about, into Gaza and the West Bank since the 80s, and I'm not saying it was pretty before, because that history is awful too. The level of depravity among Jewish Israelis, but enabled by us too, so I'm not just getting down on that. The details of that, when I hear about it from Palestinians and I read about it, well, let's just take urinating and defecating in people's living rooms in the West Bank. I'm talking about behavior. I'm not even talking about the overt violence, which has gotten a lot worse. But the demeaning, remember in the Holocaust, since it's almost impossible to wrap our mind around 6 million killed. We can talk about it, but it's pretty hard to really. What we remember within that is the demeaning of us as a people, the shaving of the beards and all that. They wanted to demean us, the invasion into communities and the roundups on Jewish holidays, for instance. That we have adopted this kind of behavior is so disgusting that it's unimaginable to me with my upbringing. Now, it had already happened when I was being raised. We were innocent in North Miami Beach, Florida. Had no idea. But when we think about it in terms of our identity, what we think of ourselves as Jews, and what has been done by us and in our name, you know, you're never going to have a complete, right? But we are getting so far away from what we believe and what we do that it can't be reconciled. So we just say, it's not true, it didn't happen. Okay, guys, I'm tired. I've talked and talked and talked. Thank you so much for your...